The platinum wedding band caught the ambient light of the Manhattan skyline one last time before I placed it onto the cold, imported marble of the kitchen island. My hand didn't shake. There were no tears blurring my vision, no dramatic gasps of air, no crushing weight in my chest. To be perfectly honest, my biggest dilemma right now was deciding which sleep masks to pack. I stood before the open suitcase on the king-sized bed, debating between the mulberry silk one infused with lavender and the temperature-regulating one with the weighted gel inserts. I sighed, tossing them both in. A good nap is essential, and I was about to embark on a very long flight. Next went my collection of premium skincare, a few comfortable oversized sweaters, and, most importantly, Vincent's limitless Black American Express card. He owed me that much for the sheer annoyance he had caused me lately. If the tabloids or the elite high society circles of New York saw me right now, they would probably write a tragic narrative. Noah Hayes the pitiful, abandoned Omega. They saw me as the fragile trophy husband who had been slowly wasting away as the great alpha CEO. Vincent Sterling built his empire and forgot his family. It was a hilarious misconception. 5 years ago, before I ever stepped foot into this 43-story penthouse, half the supernatural underworld of North America had a bounty on my head. They called me the ghost apothecary. I could concoct a poison that mimicked a heart attack perfectly or a cure that could pull a werewolf back from the brink of silver-induced death. Being a legendary supernatural pharmacist is incredibly lucrative, but severely detrimental to one's sleep schedule. I was exhausted, always running, always hiding. And then, I met Vincent. He was arrogant, ruthless, and possessed a Manhattan fortress equipped with military-grade, anti-supernatural security systems. I didn't marry him for his icy gaze or his corporate dominance. I married him because his penthouse was the only place in the Western Hemisphere where I could sleep for 12 hours, straight without fear of assassination. It was a simple, unspoken transaction. I played the role of the quiet, decorative Omega, and in return, I got the ultimate, heavily fortified bedroom. For a while, it was paradise. I laid low, caught up on years of lost sleep, and even had a kid, little Leo. But recently, Vincent had broken the unspoken terms of our arrangement. He stopped coming home. Now personally, I didn't mind his absence. It actually meant I could sprawl out in the middle of the bed. What I did mind was the noise he brought into my sanctuary. Specifically, Julian Vance. Vincent had moved Julian into the guest wing under the guise of business consulting. Julian was loud. His cologne smelled like cheap ambition, and he had an incredibly annoying habit of pacing the hardwood floors at 3:00 a.m. But worse than his lack of basic manners was his amateurish attempt at chemistry. I walked down the quiet hallway and gently pushed open the door to the nursery. The room was bathed in the soft blue glow of a nightlight. In the center, inside a custom designer crib, lay my 2-year-old son Leo. His chest was rising and falling a little too rapidly. A faint sheen of sweat coated his forehead. For the past month, Julian had been sneaking pheromone destabilizers and nightshade wolfsbane compounds into Leo's milk. It was a pathetic, textbook poison designed to trigger genetic rejection in a hybrid child. Julian wanted to make the boy sick, to drive a wedge between Vincent and me, to force me to leave so he could take my place and eventually steal Vincent's company. Did that idiot really think he could poison the son of the ghost apothecary without me noticing the scent on the very first day? I could have killed Julian. A single drop of my customized neurotoxin in his morning espresso, and his heart would have stopped before the cup hit the floor. But covering up a murder sounded like a lot of work, and I was frankly too lazy for that. Besides, I had a much more entertaining solution. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out a small, purple gummy bear. I had synthesized it this afternoon while watching a cooking show. It was a highly concentrated compound. Not only would it instantly neutralize Julian's laughable poison, but it would also act as a massive genetic catalyst. Vincent and Julian thought Leo was a fragile, failing hybrid. They didn't understand that the only thing keeping the boy's monstrous alpha vampire and werewolf strength in check was a natural biological dampener. My gummy was going to shatter that dampener into a million pieces. "Open up, little monster," I whispered, gently tapping Leo's lips. The toddler parted his mouth in his sleep. I slipped the gummy inside, and his tiny jaws instinctively chewed and swallowed. Almost immediately, his rapid breathing slowed, deepening into a powerful, steady rhythm. The flush of fever vanished from his cheeks. I brushed a lock of hair from his forehead. "Mama is going on a much-needed vacation," I murmured softly. "I'm leaving you with your papa and his little friend." Try not to break them too quickly, okay? I had no intention of taking Leo with me. Fleeing across the country with a toddler is a logistical nightmare. It completely ruins the concept of a relaxing getaway. Plus, Vincent desperately needed a crash course in fatherhood, and Julian needed to learn what happens when you mess with a sleeping dragon's cub. Leaving them locked in a penthouse with an unleashed, superpowered toddler seemed like poetic justice. I stood up, adjusting my oversized sweater, and walked back to the kitchen. The suitcase rolled smoothly behind me. I didn't leave a note. Explanations require too much effort. I just left the note I had written earlier. I'm going on vacation. Take care of the kid. I punched my private code into the elevator panel. The steel door slid open silently. As I stepped inside and turned around, my eyes drifted down the long hallway toward the open door of the nursery. The elevator doors began to close. In that final fraction of a second, before the metal sealed shut, I saw it. In the pitch-black darkness of the nursery, a pair of eyes suddenly snapped open. They were no longer the soft, innocent brown of a human child. They glowed with a terrifying radiance, predatory gold. I smiled, pressing the button for the lobby. Enjoy your new babysitting gig, Julian. Cruising at 40,000 feet in a chartered Gulfstream G650 is, without a doubt, the only civilized way to travel. The leather seats recline into actual beds. The cabin pressure is optimized for maximum skin hydration. And the flight attendant, a lovely beta named Sarah, knows exactly how I like my mimosas. Mostly champagne, with just a conceptual hint of orange juice. I took a delicate sip, adjusting the noise-canceling headphones over my ears, and propped my customized titanium tablet onto the mahogany tray table. I have always appreciated Vincent's paranoia. When he first purchased the Manhattan penthouse, he spent an obscene amount of money installing a state-of-the-art, closed-circuit security system to monitor every square inch of the property. What he didn't know was that on my second day living there, I was bored, couldn't sleep, and casually rewrote the admin protocols. I had full, untraceable access to every camera and microphone. Why watch in-flight movies when reality TV is this good? I tapped the screen, bringing up a split view of the penthouse. On the left side of my screen was the kitchen. The morning sun of New York was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Vincent walked into the frame, dressed in perfectly tailored slacks and a crisp white shirt, looking every bit the ruthless Wall Street apex predator. He stopped at the marble island. I watched his gaze fall upon the platinum wedding band and the small, carelessly torn piece of paper next to it. I'm going on vacation. Take care of the kid. Even through the silent security feed, I could vividly imagine the gears grinding to a halt in his brilliant, arrogant brain. Vincent Sterling, a man who could calculate global market shifts in his sleep, stared at a sticky note as if it were an ancient, undecipherable hieroglyph. He picked up the ring. He frowned. He pulled out his phone and started dialing. My phone, safely tucked in my carry-on and set to airplane mode, remained blissfully silent. On the screen, Vincent began pacing, his calm facade cracking. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, looking around the empty kitchen as if expecting me to jump out of the pantry. It was highly entertaining, but the real show was happening on the right side of my screen. Camera 2, the nursery. While Vincent was having his existential crisis in the kitchen, the door to the nursery silently crept open. Julian Vance slithered into the room. He was wearing a silk dressing gown, moving with the exaggerated stealth of a B-movie villain. In his right hand, he held a medical syringe filled with a pale green liquid. His signature, albeit amateurish, Nightshade Wolfsbane cocktail. I leaned back in my plush seat, crossing my legs. Showtime. Julian crept toward the designer crib. Inside, little Leo was sitting up. Thanks to the gummy bear I had fed him the night before, the biological dampener suppressing his hybrid genes was completely gone. To the untrained eye, Leo still looked like a chubby, adorable 2-year-old in dinosaur pajamas. But to anyone with actual supernatural senses, that crib currently contained the equivalent of a ticking nuclear warhead. Julian, blinded by his own ambition, sensed nothing. He leaned over the rail of the crib, a cruel, triumphant smirk playing on his lips. He uncapped the syringe, preparing to inject the final dose that he believed would tragically end the hybrid child's life. Leo blinked up at him. His eyes, usually a soft brown, were now glowing like twin miniature suns, a pure, predatory gold. The toddler tilted his head, his tiny nose twitching. He inhaled sharply. Oh, I thought, taking another sip of my mimosa. The boy is allergic to cheap cologne. Leo let out a tiny, high-pitched sneeze, achoo. The visual feed on my tablet glitched for a fraction of a second. What happened next defied all laws of standard physics. A kinetic shockwave, invisible but devastatingly powerful, erupted from the 2-year-old. The reinforced oak rails of the crib splintered into matchsticks. Julian didn't just fall backward, he was launched. He flew across the 20-foot room like a ragdoll fired from a cannon. His body slammed into the reinforced, multi-million-dollar glass wall overlooking the city skyline. The impact produced a sickening crack that I could almost hear through the screen. Julian slid down the spiderwebbed glass, collapsing into a pathetic, groaning heap on the hardwood floor. Judging by the unnatural angle of his torso, he had just earned himself at least 3 broken ribs and a shattered collarbone. A few seconds later, the nursery door burst completely open. Vincent rushed in, panic written all over his face, clearly alerted by the sound of an indoor explosion. He froze. There, in the center of the ruined room, his son was no longer sitting in a crib. Leo was floating 3 feet in the air, a golden aura radiating around his chubby little body. The toddler had managed to grab a piece of Julian's ripped silk robe and was currently gnawing on it with fangs that definitely hadn't been there yesterday. Vincent stared at the floating, glowing baby. Then he stared at Julian, who was wheezing and coughing up blood in the corner. Vincent looked completely, utterly, and hilariously out of his depth. I couldn't help the soft chuckle that escaped my lips. I tapped the screen, taking a high-definition screenshot of Vincent's horrified face. I would definitely need that for my scrapbook. "Excuse me, Mr. Hayes." Sarah, the flight attendant, approached softly. "We will be beginning our descent into Honolulu shortly. Would you care for a warm towel?" "Yes, please, Sarah," I smiled, turning off my tablet and slipping it into my bag. "And keep the champagne on ice. I have a feeling this is going to be a phenomenal vacation." There's a profound, almost spiritual peace that comes with lounging on a private, sun-drenched beach in Oahu. The gentle rhythm of the Pacific Ocean, the rustle of palm leaves, and the meticulous hands of a world-class masseur working the tension out of my shoulders. It was exactly the kind of environment a retired, highly sought-after supernatural apothecary deserved. "A little more pressure on the left shoulder blade, please, Chemo," I murmured, my eyes closed behind a pair of oversized Prada sunglasses. "Right away, Mr. Hayes," the burly Hawaiian alpha replied, his strong hands expertly kneading my muscles. It had been exactly 72 hours since I left Manhattan. 72 hours of uninterrupted sleep, gourmet seafood, and spectacular reality television. Once Chemo finished the massage and bowed respectfully, I sat up, adjusted my silk sarong, and reached for my icy pina colada. With my free hand, I tapped the screen of my tablet to check in on the live feed from the penthouse. I hadn't checked the cameras since yesterday evening, and I was eager to see the latest developments. The screen flickered to life. I almost choked on my drink. Camera 4, the living room. More accurately, what used to be the living room. The custom-made Italian leather sofas were shredded, exposing clouds of white stuffing that drifted through the air like morbid snow. The crystal chandelier, which Vincent had proudly imported from a centuries-old European estate, was currently resting in pieces on the Persian rug. There were deep, jagged claw marks across a priceless Picasso painting. But the real masterpiece was the people inhabiting this warzone. Vincent Sterling, the untouchable titan of Wall Street, was currently hiding behind the overturned marble dining table. He was wearing the same dress shirt he had on 2 days ago, now stained with what looked like pureed carrots and baby formula. His tie was wrapped around his head like a desperate Rambo bandana. He was frantically shouting into his cell phone. Even without audio, I could read his lips. "I don't care about the merger. Buy them out. No, I can't come to the office. My son just teleported into the ceiling vents." Yes, teleportation. The gummy bear I had synthesized hadn't just unlocked Leo's physical strength, it had completely shattered the limits of his alpha vampire genetics. Spatial manipulation was rare, but apparently, my little boy was a prodigy. Suddenly, with a soft pop of displaced air, Leo appeared sitting squarely on Vincent's head. The toddler giggled, pulling mercilessly at his father's perfectly styled hair. Vincent dropped his phone, letting out a silent scream of agony as he tried to pry the superpowered 2-year-old off his scalp. I took a long, satisfied sip of my cocktail. It was beautiful. All the billions in the Sterling corporate accounts couldn't buy a nanny capable of handling a fully unleashed hybrid. I knew he had tried to hire supernatural help. The security logs showed 3 different specialized babysitters entering the penthouse yesterday, a troll, a witch, and an elder goblin. None of them lasted more than 10 minutes before fleeing the building in tears. But as entertaining as Vincent's utter defeat was, my favorite show was currently broadcasting on camera 3, the guest bedroom. Julian Vance was trapped. He was sporting a very fetching fiberglass cast on his arm and thick bandages wrapped tightly around his cracked ribs. He had tried to leave the penthouse twice, but unfortunately for him, Leo had imprinted on Julian. Not as a parental figure, of course, but as a shiny, new squeaky toy. Every time Julian reached the elevator, Leo would teleport him right back into the guest room. Right now, Julian was lying on the bed, staring blankly at the ceiling, looking completely dead inside. Suddenly, the door creaked open. Leo waddled into the room. He was holding a plush wolf toy in one hand and rubbing his sleepy eyes with the other. He looked angelic. Julian visibly tensed, pressing himself against the headboard. He raised his uninjured hand in a defensive gesture. Leo stopped at the foot of the bed. He tilted his head, his golden eyes locking onto Julian. The toddler didn't know how to speak full sentences yet, but thanks to the newly unlocked psychic link inherent to his lineage, he didn't need to. He could project his thoughts directly into the minds of weaker supernatural beings. I leaned closer to the screen, grinning from ear to ear. On the screen, Julian's eyes went wide with sudden, unimaginable terror. He clutched the sides of his head, his mouth opening in a silent scream. Through the security system's audio feed, I heard Julian gasp, "No, no, please, not again. I don't know the moves." Leo simply blinked, his golden eyes glowing brighter. Defeated, broken, and weeping openly, Julian Vance, the scheming, ambitious vampire who thought he could manipulate my family, slowly stood up on his fractured legs. With tears streaming down his bruised face, he raised his arms and began to clumsily clap his hands together like the jaws of a fish. "Baby shark do," Julian sobbed out loud, forced by the psychic subjugation of a toddler to perform the dance. "Baby shark do." Leo clapped his chubby little hands in delight, giggling as the severely injured vampire spun around in a circle, wincing in agony with every step of the choreography. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I threw my head back and laughed so hard that a few nearby tourists turned to stare at me. "Everything all right, sir?" the beachside waiter asked, jogging over with a fresh plate of tropical fruits. "Everything is absolutely perfect," I replied, wiping a tear of pure joy from my eye. "In fact, I think I'll extend my stay for another week. The entertainment back home is simply to die for." There's a certain poetic beauty in watching an empire crumble, especially when it's an empire built on arrogance and neglect. I ordered another pina colada, my fourth, if we're counting, which we aren't, and settled deeper into my beach lounger. The Hawaiian sun was dipping low, casting long, golden shadows across the sand, but my attention was entirely captivated by the chaotic masterpiece unfolding on my tablet screen. New York was currently experiencing a Category 5 hurricane, and its name was Leo. The penthouse feed showed Vincent looking worse than he had an hour ago. The Rambo-style tie was gone, replaced by a look of profound, hollow despair. He was cautiously army-crawling across the ruined Persian rug, holding a half-empty bottle of premium synthetic blood like a peace offering. Leo, however, was nowhere to be seen in the living room. I switched the feed to camera 5, the library, or the room formerly known as the library. This was Vincent's sanctum, the place where he made multi-billion-dollar decisions and locked himself away from his family. It was lined with rare first editions and dark mahogany paneling. It was also, as I had discovered months ago, where Julian Vance had demanded to store his private consulting files behind a hidden, biometric safe in the wall. Currently, Leo was hovering 3 feet above the floor, a terrifying little scowl marring his chubby face. He was hungry, he was cranky, and he was missing his nap. The gummy bear's energy was reaching its peak. "Mommy," Leo mumbled a low, frustrated rumble vibrating in his chest. It sounded less like a toddler and more like a disgruntled alpha werewolf. He extended one tiny, pudgy hand toward the mahogany paneling. I watched in mild fascination as the wood didn't just splinter. It exploded outward in a shower of splinters and dust. The reinforced steel door of Julian's hidden safe was ripped from its hinges by sheer telekinetic force. It hit the opposite wall with a deafening crash. Out spilled dozens of thick file folders, encrypted hard drives, and, most damning of all, a dozen small, unmarked glass vials filled with pale green liquid. The noise brought Vincent rushing into the room, abandoning his tactical crawl. He froze in the doorway, staring at the destruction. His eyes slowly tracked from the floating toddler to the ruined safe and finally, to the scattered vials rolling across the floor. I watched his expression shift. The confusion faded, replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. Vincent Sterling might be an emotionally stunted, absent father, but he wasn't stupid. He recognized the chemical smell, the specialized storage. He recognized the poison that had been slowly killing his son. Julian, Vincent breathed. The word wasn't a name, it was a death sentence. The camera feed caught the moment Vincent's fangs descended. His eyes bled from their usual cool gray to piercing, murderous crimson. The veneer of the civilized CEO vanished, leaving only the ancient, feral vampire alpha underneath. He spun around, stalking toward the guest wing with a lethal grace I hadn't seen in years. I almost felt bad for Julian, almost. I switched the feed back to the guest bedroom just in time to see Vincent kick the door off its hinges. Julian, who was still recovering from his forced baby shark performance, scrambled backward on the bed, his face pale with terror. Vincent! Wait, Julian shrieked, holding up his good arm. I can explain. It was for the company, for you. You poisoned my son, Vincent snarled, crossing the room in a blur of motion. He grabbed Julian by the throat, lifting the struggling vampire completely off the bed. You came into my home, you ate at my table, and you poisoned my son. Hey. He was a liability, Julian choked out, his legs kicking uselessly. He was driving Noah away. I was just accelerating the process. Vincent's grip tightened. I could hear the sickening sound of Julian's cervical vertebrae beginning to crack under the pressure. It was a classic alpha rage response, brutal, immediate, and entirely useless after the fact. You're right about one thing, Vincent whispered, his voice a chilling rasp. You drove Noah away. And for that, I am going to tear you apart piece by piece. I sighed, adjusting my sunglasses. Typical alpha behavior, all brawn, no finesse. Where was this protective instinct when I actually needed it? Before Vincent could make good on his threat and turn the guest room into a slaughterhouse, a small, glowing figure materialized in the doorway. Leo had teleported. He stood there, holding a ripped page from a first edition Hemingway novel, looking extremely annoyed by the shouting. He hated loud noises when he was tired. Leo pointed a chubby finger at Julian. Vincent, sensing the sudden spike in supernatural energy, barely had time to turn his head. With a simple, dismissive flick of his wrist, Leo unleashed a wave of telekinetic force. He didn't aim at Julian. He aimed at the massive, 200-pound antique oak armoire standing against the wall. The heavy piece of furniture flew across the room like a thrown baseball. Vincent instinctively blurred out of the way, dropping Julian in the process. Julian wasn't so lucky. The armoire smashed into him with the force of a freight train, pinning the scheming vampire flat against the floor. Wood splintered, glass shattered, and Julian let out a muffled, agonized wheeze before going entirely limp. He wasn't dead. Vampires are notoriously hard to kill, but he definitely wouldn't be doing any more corporate plotting or dancing anytime soon. Leo yawned widely, rubbing his eyes, completely unbothered by the crushed body beneath the furniture. He looked up at Vincent, who was staring at his son with a mixture of profound awe and absolute terror. Just then, a sleek drone bearing the logo of a premium Manhattan courier service buzzed past the shattered living room window, dropping a small, pristine envelope onto the ruined floor before zipping away. Vincent, still shell-shocked, walked out of the guest room and picked it up. His hands trembled slightly as he tore it open. I zoomed the camera in. The image was crystal clear. It was a postcard featuring a breathtaking Hawaiian sunset. On the back in my neat, elegant handwriting was a short message. Dear Vincent, I synthesized Julian's amateur poison using a rare blood vine extract. It neutralized the toxins and acted as a genetic catalyst. Side effects: Leo will be slightly more prone to violence if he skips his afternoon nap. Good luck. Have fun playing house. P.S. Don't call me. I'm getting a pedicure. Warmly, Noah. Vincent stared at the postcard. He read it once, twice. The paper crumpled slightly in his grip. The reality of his situation finally crashing down on him. His wife hadn't fled in terror or despair. His wife had engineered an apocalyptic scenario, locked him in it with his enemy, and gone to a spa. He slowly looked up from the card, his eyes meeting the camera lens hidden in the ceiling corner. He knew I was watching. Vincent Sterling, the ruthless titan of industry, slowly sank to his knees amidst the ruins of his penthouse, holding the postcard like a lifeline, while his glowing, superpowered son began to chew on a piece of the destroyed chandelier. Checkmate, darling, I whispered to the tablet, raising my pina colada in a silent toast. The Kona coffee in Hawaii is genuinely spectacular, especially when enjoyed on a private balcony overlooking the pristine waters of Waikiki at 7 in the morning. I was dressed in a silk bathrobe, delicately slicing into a fresh papaya, when my tablet began to emit a soft, rhythmic pulsing sound. It wasn't the penthouse security system this time. It was a localized frequency intercept I had set up years ago. The emergency comms of the North American Supernatural Bureau. I tapped the notification, bringing up a flashing red map of Manhattan. Code Black anomaly detected. Location Sterling Tower, Upper East Side. Energy signature indicates a Class X hybrid mutation. Containment protocols initiated. Dispatching strike teams Alpha and Gamma. I popped a piece of sweet papaya into my mouth and chewed thoughtfully. Well, that escalated exactly according to schedule. The Bureau was notoriously sensitive to unregistered energy spikes, and Leo throwing a 200-pound antique armoire with his mind was practically a supernatural nuclear siren. I quickly switched back to the penthouse camera feeds. It was time to see if my husband retained any of his survival instincts, or if the corporate world had completely dulled his fangs. The penthouse was bathed in the red strobe lights of the building's emergency lockdown system. Vincent was moving with a frantic, desperate speed that human eyes couldn't possibly track. The calm, collected CEO was entirely gone. In his place was a terrified father operating purely on feral adrenaline. He darted into the nursery and grabbed a specialized, heavy-duty suppression blanket, woven with titanium threads and spell-forged lead, originally designed for restraining rogue werewolves. He didn't use it as a weapon though, he gently, albeit swiftly, scooped up Leo, who was currently asleep, exhausted from his tantrum and the energy expenditure. Vincent rolled the toddler into the blanket like a highly destructive, glowing burrito. The titanium weave instantly dampened the boy's radiating energy signature. Next, Vincent blurred into the guest room. Julian Vance was still pinned under the remains of the armoire, groaning in a pitiful heap of broken bones and shattered ambition. Vincent didn't say a word. He grabbed Julian by the collar of his ruined silk shirt, hoisted him up with one hand, and slung the groaning vampire over his shoulder like a sack of garbage. Smart move, I noted, taking a sip of my coffee. Leaving Julian behind for the Bureau to interrogate would have exposed the poisoning plot, but it would have also resulted in Leo being classified as a dangerous mutant weapon. Vincent was cleaning up the mess. The camera feed from the private elevator showed Vincent descending just as the Bureau's tactical helicopters began hovering outside the shattered penthouse windows. He had beaten them by a margin of 60 seconds. For the next half hour, my screens were relatively quiet as Vincent navigated the underground escape routes of New York to reach his private airfield. I took the opportunity to shower, apply my premium vitamin C serum, and get dressed in a breezy, open-button linen shirt and tailored shorts. By the time I returned to the tablet, Vincent's jet, the G650, was already taxiing onto the runway. Hacking the internal cameras of Vincent's jet was embarrassingly easy. He really needed to fire his cybersecurity team. The cabin feed flickered to life. The contrast to my own flight a few days ago was staggering. Vincent was sitting in one of the plush leather seats, looking like he had just survived a war zone. His expensive suit was torn, covered in dust, wood splinters, and Julian's dried blood. His hair, usually immaculate, was a chaotic mess. In the corner of the cabin, Julian was securely strapped to a seat using an excessive, almost comical amount of heavy-duty duct tape. A piece of tape was plastered firmly over his mouth, muffling his continuous, pathetic whimpers. Every time the plane hit a patch of turbulence, Julian would flinch, clearly aggravating his broken ribs. I couldn't help but smile. Karma is a wonderful thing. But my gaze ultimately settled back on Vincent. He was holding the titanium burrito that contained our son. Leo was still fast asleep, completely oblivious to the fact that he was currently the most wanted supernatural fugitive on the eastern seaboard. Vincent stared down at the sleeping toddler, slowly, his broad shoulders slumped, the rigid, unyielding posture of the great Alpha CEO dissolved completely. He buried his face in his free hand. The jet's internal microphones picked up a sound I hadn't heard from Vincent in years, a ragged, shuddering breath. "I'm sorry," Vincent whispered, his voice cracking in the empty cabin. "I'm so sorry, Leo. I built an empire to protect you, and I almost let you die inside it." He gently brushed a hand over the titanium fabric, right where Leo's head rested. "I don't know how to fix this," Vincent admitted to the sleeping child, the absolute defeat evident in his tone. "Money didn't save us. The board of directors couldn't save us. I failed you. Both of you." He lifted his head, staring blankly out the window into the dark, pre-dawn sky. "But I'm going to find your mama. Even if he kills me for this, I'm going to bring him back to you." Watching him through the screen, I felt a tiny, almost imperceptible twinge in my chest. A small part of me, the omega part that used to wait up for him every night, wanted to reach out and comfort him. But I quickly pushed the feeling down. Apologies born from crisis are cheap. Real change requires a complete, systemic dismantling of a person's ego. Vincent needed to hit rock bottom before he could understand the value of what he had lost. I checked the flight tracker widget on my screen. The jet was due to land at Honolulu International Airport in exactly 5 hours. I picked up my phone, dialing a number I hadn't used in a while. It belonged to Jackson Ford, the reigning alpha of the Hawaiian supernatural territories, and a man whose life I had saved 3 years ago. "No way." Jackson's deep voice rumbled through the speaker. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Good morning, Jackson," I said cheerfully, walking out onto the sunlit balcony. "I'm calling to cash in that favor. I have a guest arriving in a few hours, and I need to set up a proper welcome committee on the beach. Something that says I am entirely out of your league. Can you arrange that?" Jackson chuckled a dark, knowing sound. "Consider it done, Doc. We'll roll out the red carpet." I hung up, looking out at the endless expanse of the blue ocean. Vincent Sterling was coming to rescue me. He was about to find out that I didn't need rescuing. I was the one pulling all the strings. The private beach at Jackson Ford's sprawling Hawaiian estate was a slice of untouched paradise. The sand was like powdered sugar, the ocean a vibrant turquoise, and the service was simply impeccable. Jackson, a towering alpha werewolf who controlled the Pacific underworld syndicates with an iron fist, was currently holding a large silk parasol over my lounger to ensure my skin didn't suffer from UV damage. To my right, another alpha, a notoriously ruthless vampire lord from the West Coast who owed me his unlife after a nasty poisoning incident 3 years ago, was carefully peeling a bowl of frozen grapes. "Is the angle of the shade acceptable, Dr. Hayes?" Jackson asked, his gravelly voice remarkably gentle. "Perfect, Jackson," I murmured, adjusting my designer sunglasses. "Though the grapes could be slightly colder, Marcus." "Right away, sir," the vampire lord replied immediately, applying a localized frost spell to the crystal bowl. I was just settling into what promised to be a truly magnificent afternoon nap when the sound of heavy, dragging footsteps crunched against the pristine sand. I opened one eye. Vincent Sterling had arrived. He looked absolutely terrible. The immaculate, untouchable CEO was completely gone, replaced by a man pushed to the absolute edge of his sanity. He was carrying the titanium-wrapped bundle that was our son in one arm, and with his other, he was dragging Julian Vance by the collar. Julian was still heavily duct-taped, covered in dirt, and whimpering pathetically. Vincent stopped about 20 feet away. He dropped Julian onto the sand with a dull thud. Vincent stared at me, then. His gaze slowly shifted to the heavily armed, incredibly powerful alphas who were currently fanning me and feeding me fruit. The confusion on his face rapidly morphed into a profound, earth-shattering realization. For 5 years, Vincent thought he was my protector. He thought his Manhattan penthouse was my fortress, that his vast corporate wealth was my safety net. Standing there on the beach, looking at the most dangerous men in North America treating me like royalty, he was finally realizing the truth. I didn't marry him for protection. I married him because his bed was comfortable and I didn't want to be bothered. "No way," Vincent choked out, his voice hoarse and broken. He took a shaky step forward, completely ignoring the low, warning growls from the alphas surrounding me. "No way. I brought him. I brought Leo." I sat up slowly, waving a lazy hand to silence Jackson and the others. "I can see that, Vincent. And you brought the trash too. How thoughtful." "The Supernatural Bureau," Vincent breathed, his chest heaving with exhaustion. "They tracked the jet. They're coming. We have to run. I'll hold them off, but you need to take Leo and..." The rhythmic, deafening thumping of helicopter blades cut him off. 3 black tactical choppers crested the palm trees, kicking up a massive sandstorm. Heavy ropes dropped, and dozens of elite, heavily armed Bureau agents rappelled onto the beach, their magical assault rifles raised and glowing with lethal energy. By order of the North American Supernatural Bureau, a magically amplified voice boomed over the roar of the ocean. "Surrender the Class X hybrid anomaly immediately." Vincent didn't hesitate. He gently set the titanium bundle down on the sand. His fangs descended, his eyes burned a feral crimson, and his claws elongated. He stepped between the heavily armed strike team and our son, ready to die a brutal, pointless death to buy us a few seconds. It was actually quite romantic in a tragic, meat-headed alpha sort of way. I let out a long, exaggerated sigh. I swear to God, I can't get one peaceful afternoon on this damn island. I stood up, brushing a stray grain of sand off my linen shorts. I walked past Jackson, past a ready-to-die Vincent, and stepped right up to the titanium burrito lying on the sand. "No way. Get back," Vincent roared, sheer panic lacing his voice. I ignored him. I reached down and unrolled the titanium blanket. Leo was awake, looking groggy and radiating a terrifying, pulsating golden energy. He let out a grumpy little growl that made the bureau agents tighten their grips on their weapons. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small blue mint. I popped it into Leo's mouth. "Chew, sweetheart." Leo chewed. I raised my right hand, gathered a tiny spark of my own dormant energy, and snapped my fingers. Snap! The sound echoed impossibly loud, cutting through the noise of the helicopters like a physical blade. Instantly, the terrifying golden aura surrounding Leo vanished. The oppressive, mutant energy signature that had triggered a nationwide manhunt evaporated into thin air. The complex biological locks I had engineered years ago snapped perfectly back into place. Leo blinked his big, soft brown eyes. He looked at the loud helicopters, looked at the scary men with guns, and did what any normal 2-year-old would do. He puckered his bottom lip and began to cry. "Mama," he wailed, reaching his chubby little arms up to me. I scooped him up, resting his warm weight on my hip, and gently patted his back. "They're their baby. Mama's got you. It's just some noisy birds." The bureau agents stood frozen. Their tactical mage commanders were frantically tapping their scanners, hitting the devices in absolute confusion. "Sir," one of the agents yelled into his comms. "The anomaly, it's gone. 0 energy readings. It's literally just a normal human toddler." The commander stared at me, then at the crying child, and finally at the ring of terrifying alphas standing behind me with murder in their eyes. He swallowed hard. "False alarm, fall back. Fall back now." Within 2 minutes, the helicopters retreated, leaving behind nothing but the sound of the ocean waves and Leo's quiet sniffling against my shoulder. I turned around. Vincent was staring at me as if I were a god who had just descended from the heavens. His fangs were retracted. His claws were gone. The realization of how effortlessly I had just solved a problem that had nearly destroyed his entire world hit him like a physical blow. His knees gave out. Vincent Sterling, the ruthless titan of Manhattan, collapsed onto the white sand. He buried his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking with silent, overwhelmed sobs. He wasn't just defeated, he was completely, utterly, and finally humbled. I adjusted Leo on my hip, walked back over to my lounger, and sat down. "Jackson," I said mildly. "Yes, Dr. Hayes." "Throw Julian in the storage shed, and bring my husband a glass of water. He looks terribly dehydrated." There's a profound, fundamental difference between returning to a marriage out of forgiveness and returning to it via a hostile corporate takeover. I highly recommend the latter. It does wonders for your complexion. It took exactly 3 weeks to repair the Manhattan penthouse. During that time, I remained in Hawaii, sipping cocktails and allowing Vincent to handle the contractors. I only gave him 2 specific directives. The nursery needed reinforced, spell-resistant walls, and our master bedroom required absolute, military-grade soundproofing. A retired apothecary needs his rest. Now, a month later, the morning sun of New York filtered beautifully through the newly installed, shatterproof floor-ceiling windows. I stretched languidly against the high thread-count Egyptian cotton sheets. The digital clock on the nightstand read 11:45 a.m., a perfectly acceptable time to start the day. I slipped into my silk robe and padded out into the living room, ready to inspect my newly established empire. The scene that greeted me was nothing short of a Renaissance painting of domestic subjugation. In the open-concept kitchen, Vincent Sterling, formerly the most terrifying CEO on Wall Street, was wearing a slightly wrinkled gray t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants. He was hunched over the marble island, his brow furrowed in intense, alpha-level concentration. He wasn't reviewing quarterly profit margins or orchestrating corporate mergers. He was meticulously pureeing organic sweet potatoes. "The temperature has to be exactly 98.6 degrees, Vincent muttered to himself, aiming a digital culinary thermometer at the bowl of orange mush. "If it's too hot, he won't eat it. Focus, Vincent, focus." I leaned against the doorframe, suppressing a smirk. When we were on the beach in Hawaii, right after Vincent had his spectacular emotional breakdown, I handed him a napkin from the resort bar. On it, I had hastily scribbled the terms of my return. Clause 1, Vincent transferred 80% of Sterling Corporation's voting shares to a trust controlled by me, with Leo as the sole beneficiary. Vincent retained the title of CEO in name only, effectively demoting himself to my highly paid employee. Clause 2. Vincent was strictly forbidden from working past 5:00 p.m. or taking weekend calls. His new primary occupation was head chef and chauffeur for his son. He signed the napkin without a second thought, using a pen he borrowed from a very intimidating werewolf. "Smells acceptable," I announced, making my presence known. Vincent's head snapped up, his eyes, completely devoid of their former cold arrogance, immediately softened. He looked tired, yes, but there was a new, grounded peace about him. He wiped his hands on a kitchen towel and quickly crossed the room to press a gentle, reverent kiss to my forehead. "Good morning, darling," Vincent said softly. "Did you sleep well?" "Impeccably," I replied, accepting the cup of perfectly brewed espresso he handed me. "Where is the entertainment?" Vincent sighed, a faint smile tugging at his lips, and gestured toward the laundry room down the hall. "Ah yes. Clause 3. I strolled down the hallway, sipping my espresso. The laundry room door was ajar. Inside, standing before a large utility sink, was Julian Vance. The formerly ambitious, backstabbing vampire lord was wearing a bright pink, ruffled apron that said "Kiss the Cook," a gag gift I had bought specifically for this purpose. His sleeves were rolled up, and his hands, which used to hold crystal whiskey glasses and poison vials, were currently plunged elbow-deep in soapy water, vigorously scrubbing a soiled cloth diaper. I had considered handing Julian over to the Supernatural Bureau, but federal prison seemed too easy a fate. Instead, I used a rather complex, ancient blood-binding spell. I sealed away 99% of Julian's vampire abilities. He had no super strength, no speed, and no compulsion. He was, for all intents and purposes, a fragile mortal. Furthermore, he was bound to the penthouse as Leo's unpaid, indentured nanny for the next 5 years. "You missed a spot on the left edge, Julian," I noted casually, taking a sip of my coffee. Julian stiffened. He slowly turned his head, glaring at me with eyes full of impotent, bubbling rage. He opened his mouth, likely to spit out a vile insult. Before he could speak, a familiar, tiny voice echoed from the living room. "Mama, play," Leo babbled happily. Julian's face instantly drained of all color. He clamped his mouth shut, his eyes widening in pure, conditioned terror. He remembered the unwritten rule. He remembered the psychic link. If Leo got upset, if Leo cried, the telepathic broadcast of Baby Shark would begin playing in Julian's mind on an endless, unyielding loop. "Yes, Mr. Hayes," Julian choked out through gritted teeth, turning back to the sink and scrubbing the diaper with frantic, desperate energy. "I will ensure it is spotless." "Good boy," I praised mildly, turning on my heel. I walked back into the living room. Leo was sitting on his playmat, safely confined by a magical ward that prevented any accidental teleportation. He was busy trying to stack colorful wooden blocks. Vincent walked over, holding the bowl of perfectly temperature-controlled sweet potatoes. He sat cross-legged on the floor next to our son, making airplane noises as he guided the spoon toward Leo's mouth. Leo giggled, happily accepting the food, his golden eyes flashing with nothing but innocent joy. I sat down on the pristine, newly purchased velvet sofa, stretching my legs out. Vincent looked up at me, a dollop of sweet potato landing on his cheek as Leo wildly waved his hands. The great, terrifying alpha looked utterly ridiculous, entirely domesticated, and completely devoted. He caught my gaze, and the profound gratitude in his eyes spoke volumes. He knew he was on probation. He knew he had to earn this every single day. And for the first time in our marriage, I actually believed he would. I took another sip of my espresso, closing my eyes and listening to the sound of my husband playing with our son, accompanied by the faint, rhythmic splashing of my enemy washing dirty diapers down the hall. Revenge, I decided, is a dish best served with a long, uninterrupted afternoon nap. I smiled, pulling a silk sleep mask over my eyes. It was a beautiful Sunday in Manhattan,